Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we are going to cover how to say if clause 1, clause 2. And in order to do this, we are going to use the Japanese structure ba form of clause 1 followed by just clause 2. And that clause 2 is going to be in whatever conjugation it needs to be to express what you're trying to say. But the important thing here is that clause 1 is in its ba form to represent that conditional if. So as mentioned in a previous video, the ba form is one of various ways to express a kind of conditional statement, and the ba form can be applied to not only verbs but also adjectives and nouns, as we learned in the previous video, which you definitely should have watched before watching this one because it is the introduction to this grammar pattern basically. But there are distinctions between the ba form and the other various conditional forms, such as the tada form or the word nada basically, and we have not covered those two other ones yet, but this is the distinction that we need to know when we want to use ba and if it's okay to use ba in the first place. So if we're using the ba form of verbs in this grammar construct, in which verbs are representing clause 1 and clause 2, this grammar construct actually can't be used at all if the verb in clause 1 represents an action or an event, and the verb in clause 2 is to represent a suggestion or a request or a demand. That's just simply a no-go, and in that case, if we want to express a verb that is an action or event in clause 1 followed by a verb in clause 2 that represents a command or a request or a suggestion, we're supposed to use the tada form for that instead, which is another conditional form that we will cover in a future video. However, if the verb in clause 1 is actually just a verb that expresses a state of being that isn't an action or an event, then the verb in clause 2 can freely be used as a command, a suggestion, or a request. We have no problem using the ba form here with that scenario. Extending that thought to using the ba form with adjectives and nouns, that restriction doesn't apply at all because adjectives and nouns are kind of automatically expressions of state of beings. We have no restriction with that. We can use those freely with the ba form in this construct. However, on the topic of adjectives and nouns, for this grammar construct, the ba form, na-adjectives and nouns are rarely used with the ba form in informal conversation just because it sounds too formal. Usually when na-adjectives and nouns are expressed in the conditional sense, we simply just follow them with the word nada, which is a representation of condition, and that will be covered in a future video. But for now, just know that that is the more widely used conditional form for na-adjectives and nouns, even though it is still technically possible to use na-adjectives and nouns in the ba form, and we will cover that in examples, but it is just seldom used in informal situations. And the last thing to note here is that this grammar construct is often used in conjunction with the word moshi, which kind of itself just translates to if. So we kind of have if and if in the same sentence twice, but that's just the Japanese way, so don't question that too much. Okay, with that being said and done, let's move on to examples using verbs, adjectives, non-adjectives, and nouns in their ba form to get a better understanding of this grammar pattern. For our first example sentence, we have the line yoku benkyou sureba manten o toreru. And what this line translates to is basically just, if I study well, I can score a perfect score, or I can get a perfect score. If we break down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have yoku. Yoku here is going to be an adverb that modifies the word after it. It's going to mean well, basically. And the word after it is benkyou suru, which is the verbal noun to study. Here we're going to change suru into its ba form because we want it to mean if I study. Then it's going to turn into sureba. Suru turns into sureba, so yoku benkyou sureba is if I study well. That kind of splits the sentence in half. Now we have the next clause, and that is manten o toreru. And manten is just going to translate to perfect score, basically. O is marking perfect score as a direct object, and toreru is the verb toru, to get or to take. But in this sense, it's going to be to get, kind of, in its potential form. So toru turns into toreru, so if toru means to get, then toreru means to be able to get. So I can get a perfect score if I study well. Yoku benkyou sureba manten o toreru. For our next example sentence, we have the line konya jikan ga areba geimu shiyou to omou. And this line is just going to translate to basically, if I have time tonight, I think I will play games. Breaking down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have konya, which means this evening or tonight. We have jikan, which means time. We have ga areba. This is going to be ga aru, which means to have time. Aru is going to be turned into its ba form, so areba. So if I have time is what it's going to be now. And that moves it on to the next part of the sentence. Geimu shiyou to omou. This is just going to be the verbal noun game suru, to play games basically. Suru is going to be turned into its volitional form. Shiyou, which means I am going to play games, but it's also modified by the ending to omou. So it's I think I am going to play games. So combine that with the first part of the sentence and we have if I have time tonight, I think I will play games. Konya jikan ga areba geimu shiyou to omou. So we've used the ba form with verbs. Now we'll move on to adjectives. We'll start with e-adjectives. And for our first example sentence for e-adjectives in their ba form, we are going to use the line takakereba tomodachi ni okane o kariru koto ga dekiru. And what this line is translating to is basically, if it's expensive, I can borrow money from my friends. Breaking down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have takakereba, and this is just the e-adjective takai. We're going to take the stem of it, we're going to add kereba, so takai turns into takakereba, and that is going to be if it's expensive, if expensive. Then we have tomodachi ni. Tomodachi is friend, ni is marking friend as the indirect object. After that we have okane, which is money. The particle o right after is going to mark it as the direct object of the action kariru, which is to borrow. And kariru is going to be modified by koto ga dekiru, which means can borrow. So altogether that second part of the sentence is I can borrow money from friends or from a friend. Combine that with the first part of the sentence and it's just going to be if it's expensive, I can borrow money from friends or a friend. Takakereba tomodachi ni okane o kariru koto ga dekiru. For our next example sentence, we're going to use a na-adjective, and our pretty simple line is hima de areba issho ni benkyou shimasen ka? And this is going to translate to if you're free, if you have time, won't you study together with us or me? Breaking down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have the na-adjective hima, which means free or available kind of. We're going to modify that into its ba form, so all we have to do is add de areba after that. So de areba means if you are free. And the second part of the sentence is issho ni benkyou shimasen ka? Issho ni is going to be together with. The implied person that you're doing it with is either me or us. And then we have the action, which is benkyou suru. Benkyou suru is the verbal noun that means to study. We're going to conjugate suru into shimasen ka, which is the polite negative form, followed by the particle ka, and that's a grammar pattern that means would you like to study with us or won't you study with us. So altogether, hima de areba issho ni benkyou shimasen ka is if you're free, won't you study with me or won't you study with us. For our last example sentence for this grammar pattern, we're going to use a noun, and our pretty simple line is doyobi de areba iku koto ga dekiru. And what this line is just saying is basically if it's Sunday, then I can go. Breaking down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have doyobi, which is just Sunday. We have de areba turning into its ba form. So doyobi de areba means if it's Sunday. Then we continue on to the next part of the sentence. Iku koto ga dekiru. It's a simple grammar pattern. It's just the verb iku, which means to go, modified by koto ga dekiru, and this turns it into the potential form basically. So iku koto ga dekiru means I can go or can go. The implied subject is I or me. So if it's Sunday, I can go. Doyobi de areba iku koto ga dekiru. And so yeah, that is how we use the ba form in this construct, in which the first clause is in its ba form followed by a second clause in whatever conjugation it needs to be to mean if clause 1, then be. And we used examples that had verbs in their ba forms, e-adjectives in their ba forms, and na-adjectives in their ba forms, and even a noun in its ba form. So that is covering a lot of bases, and hopefully that is a good intuitive look into how the ba form is not only conjugated into but also executed in sentences to have a grammatical meaning.